A new research by AJ Deuce indicates that the inscriptions in the Dome of the Rock come from the 16th century, not the 7th century. This undoubtedly will have a massive implication for the standard Islamic narrative. Well, hello everyone. This is Fadi, and I want to welcome you to a brand new video series with Mel. And as always, if we mention our brother Mel, that means we're talking about historical criticism of something related to Islam. This time, it is the Dome of the Rock, actually, which is a very popular site in basically in the Middle East. Muslims, of course, try to make a claim to it. Because it's associated to the act of or the event of Isra and Mi'raj, meaning the fact that Muhammad was taken from Mecca to allegedly modern-day Al-Quds or Jerusalem, to that particular site, and then ascended from there to heaven. Now, if you want to believe that story, obviously we are going to show you that there are so many problems with that in the first place. But all that to say is that today, and in a videos that will follow in this particular video series and these parts that we will be addressing, we are going to focus more on the inscriptions that are found inside of the Dome of the Rock area. And we are going to, of course, let Mel unpack all of that for us. We don't know really how long it might take. It could be 4, 5, or 6 different videos under this series. So we'll see where we will end up, but that's primarily the focus here. Now, of course, I want to invite to our studios virtually Mel. But believe it or not, we were able to manage to bring him right here to be seated next to me. I don't know how that happened, but apparently technology can make miracles. Mel, thank you so much for being here. And we're excited really to have you virtually. It's kind of scary to know that you're sitting next to me, even though you're not next to me right now.
It's great to be in the studio finally, even if it is virtually.
Amen. So why don't you give people a quick overview? What is it that we are going to cover in this particular video series?
Yeah, so I suppose the key thing is the inscriptions, the key inscriptions which are on the arcade inside the Dome of the Rock. They are 20 meters long. They're very important for Islam. Without those inscriptions, Islam would have a much harder case to make for the fact that it came from the 7th century. And it buttresses the entire standard Islamic narrative. AJ Deuce brought out a paper in February. He sent it to me actually the day before it was officially published. And in it, he argues that the inscriptions couldn't be from the 7th century. And I've heard similar arguments before, and I wasn't particularly convinced by those arguments. But AJ Deuce makes the argument that it isn't just a few decades later or even a few centuries later, but way later. I won't let you know at this stage. I'd like to keep a bit of a surprise, but obviously that's a huge difference to what we've been told up to now, and it has huge implications. Without that inscription, which basically says that Abdul al-Malik built the Dome of the Rock, an awful lot of what we know about Islam hinges around that, what we thought was a verified piece of data. So it's a bit of a bombshell, really. And even though it's kind of inconvenient in some respects, because the rock inscription is very helpful in understanding early Islam, but if it's not really from the 7th century, then we need to kind of look again and see, well, when did Islam really begin? So that's essentially my overview.
Wonderful.
Into it.
And thank you. So this is based on an academic research that was done by AJ Deuce. And do you think upon publication, is it peer-reviewed already? Because sometimes people ask these kind of questions. I just want to give you the opportunity to address that. And even if it's not peer-reviewed, at least it is published for people to go and read it.
Yeah, I can't tell you whether it's peer-reviewed at this moment in time. I presume it's being peer-reviewed after publication.
Right.
I'm not sure to what extent it was peer-reviewed prior to this.
But the point is, someone took the time and willing to at least put their name out there in an article that is being published and accessible to people right now. And our job, of course, is to bring it to the forefront. And I don't think you and I are making any definitive assertion, because if tomorrow someone can come up with a new discovery, we welcome that. We would like to explore it. But for now, it seems like, based on everything that we've uncovered so far, Mel, you and I, everything leads to a later development.
Absolutely.
And that's the theme that we are discovering so far. So please go ahead in this particular opener of the series. What would you like to share with us?
Okay, so I'm just going to show you my slide for those who want to follow up on what I'm covering with you today. Here are my different channels where you can have a look at. So the papers, AJ Deuce's paper is called The Jewish Serpent King in the Dome of the Rock. It was published in February. In this part, I'm going to be looking at the question of, is AJ Deuce's paper credible? My exposition of AJ's paper is provisional, and this is really what you were saying just a moment ago. It's also hypothetical and is subject to further examination. So this is not me being categorical. I am persuaded by many of his arguments, but bear that in mind. This is the beginning of a debate. But it has huge implications if it turns out that it is true. So his central thesis is the Dome of the Rock inscriptions are not from the 7th century, but the 16th century at the earliest. Thomas Alexander, who's one of the sin sifters, will be making a robust critique of it in due course, and I await his review. So this is not the final word by any means. If the inscriptions really are from the 7th century, then they provide useful data from which to argue either that they are anti-Trinitarian polemics addressed to a Christian audience, which is Thomas Alexander's position, or a more subtle argument addressed to a Jewish audience, which is what Red Judaism would argue. If AJ Deuce is correct, and the inscriptions are 16th century, then they are either acts of fraud or deception, if intended to mislead as to their antiquity, or simply address a contemporary concern in the 16th century and have been misconstrued. So I would take the line that I believe that these were misconstrued as being from the 7th century, because there are a lot of elements within the Dome of the Rock which can only have been from the 16th century. For example, there are inscriptions to do with Suleiman in the 16th century, at the same time as there was a lot of work going on in the interior of the Dome of the Rock in the 16th century. So it is possible that people have come along later and assumed, looking at the inscriptions, that they must be from the 7th century when it was never intended to be taken that way. Now, my position is that it is extremely unlikely that the inscriptions could have come down to us in pristine condition, considering multiple earthquakes over the centuries and fires that burned down the roof of the Dome of the Rock. Now, if you compare the picture on the left with the picture on the right, I think it would be fair to say that the picture on the left looks far better than the picture on the right. It looks a lot newer. There are no defects whatsoever on the left, but the one on the right looks faded, jaded. There's pieces that have been damaged over the centuries. But the image on the right is from the Cordoba Mosque. And as you can see, it's from the mid-10th century. So if what's on the left is from the 7th century, the one on the right is 3 centuries younger, and yet it looks way older than the one on the left. I think just visually there, I think that's a good indicator that there's something amiss. Coupled with that, there is simply no mention of these inscriptions before the 16th century, despite there being Arab Christians living in Jerusalem that could easily have reported on them. And I've yet to find any early mention of these inscriptions. Obviously, if one is found, that would debunk AJ Deuce's case. But it's amazing that for the guts of 9 centuries, no one, and I mean no one, reported about the specific inscriptions on the 20-meter section inside the arcade. And
so let me ask a question then, Mel. If we are talking about the inscriptions that at least talk about Jesus, if you wish, And if indeed AJ Deuce Deuce, I should say, is correct that it was 16th century, this is very damaging even to the Qira'at, because in there is a variant text reading compared to what we have in the Hafs reading. That tells me that this particular variant reading that does not coincide with Hafs, for instance, continued on up until the time of the inscription in the 16th century, if indeed that's the dating.
Yes, if that is the case, and it might be part of the reason why the Hafs was chosen, because they wouldn't have wanted it to match perfectly. They wouldn't have wanted it to look like a manuscript from the 16th century, so they would have had to use a different one. That's one possible idea that has occurred to me when I thought about that.
Yeah.
So it's hugely damaging. It's very hard to believe that no one would have mentioned this until the 16th century. We've all assumed, because we're used to hearing this is from the 7th century, that there must be testimonies to this all through the centuries, but there's nothing there. And because of the material, it's very juicy material when you think about it. You'd expect someone to talk about it. There should be debates about it. There should be back and forths between Christians and Muslims about the content of this. But we don't see any mention of that. That's until the 16th century.
Yeah. So in the next maybe couple of minutes, what would you like to cover here to set it up for the next one?
Okay. So I was just going to finish that. Lastly, the Crusaders had control over the Temple Mount for 2 centuries, so had every chance and reason to destroy any inscriptions dedicated to Muhammad. I'm going to be talking about the fact that there was no way that the inscriptions would have survived the period of the Crusaders, because of the fact that the Pope was very much against keeping a memorial to Muhammad, as we'll see in the next episode. And the fact that the Crusaders had a lot of animosity towards Muslims in that period, and they had control of the Temple Mount, it stands to reason that they would have destroyed the inscriptions had they existed at that time. So that's what I'm going to be looking at in the next episode.
That's an excellent point. Thank you so much, and a good way to end this opening video of this series. Again, we're talking about the inscriptions at the Dome of the Rock and the possibility that they actually date much later than 7th century. And it's based on a research done by someone by the name of AJ Deuce, which we are making a reference to his own writings and conclusions as well. And of course, we want to thank Mel for unpacking all of that for us. Until we meet again in the next episode of this series, this is Al-Fadi. God bless you. Take care. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, CIRA International, and click on the bell so that you receive notifications whenever we publish a new video or go live. I would also like to appeal to you to consider becoming a Patreon patron by clicking the link right below. By doing so, you can give towards the production of these videos. There are also other options for you where you can give to our channel. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.